All right. Hi, everyone. My name's Mike. I'm joined with Matt, Richie, Chris, and Kyla, and we are doing our report on the California flood management. So, some background about California. It's the third largest state by area, and by population, it's the largest state with 40 million people. It's on the west coast of the United States, and it's bordered by Oregon, Nevada, Arizona, Mexico, and the Pacific Ocean. And California is known for its beaches, cities, mountains, and deserts. So, some climate about California. Geographically, it's the most diverse state in terms of various climates. It's divided into northern and southern California, and the climate consists of cool, desert, highlands, Mediterranean, and steppe. For Southern California, it's more of the hot region, and Northern California is a cooler region.
Just some additional images in terms of climate identification. You can see on the left we have an image that shows the average temperatures in the warmest months in California, and as you can see where the desert regions are, we have a lot more warmer climates towards the south. The middle picture, you can see the average precipitation. California down south doesn't really get any, and just towards the north you get a little bit of that blue dot, which is a lot of precipitation. But and then all the way on the right, you can see a graph in terms of the low temperatures of the coldest months. So fairly diverse in terms of climate, as you can see in California. So our main conflict at hand is the flooding that has been occurring in California, and just a basic conflict, as you can see, in terms of climate change. We have the rising sea levels. But Northern California, over this past year, has experienced a mega drought, which is due to unexpected climate change and therefore increases the occurrence of a precipitation whiplash, which is kind of about if California experiences a large drought, it might turn this complete switch and will experience heavy amount of precipitation and complete switch in climate change. But our main flood generator are these atmospheric rivers, which are a narrow piece of moisture which enter the Pacific and move east towards high mountainous regions and interact with the climate up in the mountains, which result in high volume rain, runoff, and hurricane-like atmospheres. And in 2017, atmospheric rivers filled the reservoirs at Oroville Dam, which required excavation of more than 180,000 people and caused more than $1 billion worth of damage. There's a study done by First Street Foundation. This graph basically shows California's climate change from 1945 to the predicted next 60 years. It basically shows the vulnerability of flooding how the flooding can occur drastically over this time period and could be a serious issue. In addition, this foundation estimated that over 500,000 homes are currently in danger of flooding, and that number could increase to around 150,000 within the next 30 years if things don't change. But yeah, basically in this graph, you can see how within the next 30 years, the extreme wet years will oversee the extreme dry years, which is what this foundation is trying to point out, which is very dangerous.
California sees years of wet periods followed by years of dry spells, which you can see in the graph. These extreme weather fluctuations cause many of the natural disasters that we've talked about in California. Groundwater management during these drought periods is not handled as well as they should be, which causes depletion in the water reserves. The Tulare Basin in the Central Valley is affected most by these dry seasons, In later years, the management was a little bit better. So during the wet seasons, it helped to rejuvenate the groundwater, but it dipped significantly in the dry seasons. Most of the flooding in California is due to riverine flooding, which happens because of excess rainfall, snowmelt, and runoff, as well as levee failures. The most recent flood in California happened in 2017. The Russian River flooded 3 feet above flood level, which affected around 600,000 people and caused mudslides, power surges, and road closures. The Sacramento Veer was opened for the first time in 11 years in order to combat the effects of this flood.
Here's a timeline from California's history of floods, and orange ticks on the timeline represent statewide floods that occurred basically from the north end to the south end of the state. Blue ticks represent floods that only affected Southern California, and then the purple ticks represent floods that only affected Northern California. And to the far right of the timeline, you can see that in 2017, the Oroville Dam emergency was a statewide flood, and that was something that caused a huge problem in California. Lots of other floods were caused by heavy rainfalls, but more floods in California's history were also dam failures, just like the Oroville Dam in 2017.
So, although important and potentially life-threatening, logistical human conflicts of water needs and other utility damages, such as damage to power grids, are not where the issues end with flooding. Certain already under duress features of Californian ecological wildlife are also at higher risk when flooding goes unchecked. What remains after wildfires, which are becoming more and more common and severe as the years go on in the state, are more at risk than other wildlife areas in the face of mud flows and landslides, which we've talked about occur after flooding. Additionally, certain flood mitigation plans would free up floodplain areas, allowing certain fish to return to their natural habitats. An example being the Sacramento Valley Chinook seen below.
So for flood mitigation, many flood insurance programs can help reduce recovery times from major floods. However, nationwide flood insurance is becoming harder and harder to get as the program loses funding every year. Disincentivization of building within floodplains began. So the federal government began requiring builders and contractors to purchase flood insurance for their buildings if they were in a 100-year floodplain. So the idea is to raise tax rates and incur tax penalties on businesses and residences within floodplains. And California is famously known for the Los Angeles River, which is a naturally occurring river that throughout the history of the state has changed shape and direction from previous floods. But it also is a 51-mile long channel lined with concrete. The idea was to channel all of the runoff from rainfall out to the ocean to prevent flooding. So future flood management, engineers have proposed rebuilding sections of the Los Angeles River, but it comes with an estimated $1.2 billion budget and an estimated timeline of 50 years. While the state of California has said that it is willing to pay its portion and can pay its part of the part of the bill, basically, the federal government doesn't want to continue with the project because the Army Corps of Engineers can't decide on the best way to mitigate channeling the water through the floodplains. However, future flood management hopes to incorporate floods into water management and not just creating channels like the Los Angeles River to channel the runoff into the ocean.
So we've talked about this plenty, but California is unique in that it's subject to the extremes. If it isn't torrential storms from these atmospheric rivers, it's potential drought where reservoirs can be at dangerously low levels for years. And the storms talked about throughout this presentation and their subsequent floods in some areas of the state can account for up to 2/3 of the year's total rainfall. So since this is the case, the infrastructure that would deal with the flooding has to at the same time make use of the water volume and retain what it can instead of just running off to the ocean. And the approaches we have covered would therefore effectively improve this other main issue that the state experiences, drought. And through the relationship to the measures and infrastructure seen here, especially reservoirs and basins, this would also be an effect that would be improved, hopefully.